there's as much opportunity for people to do research in the UK as there's anywhere else. And we have got a fantastic ecosystem to do it in. So I think we should feel very proud and privileged to be able to do things here.
Welcome to Season 2 of the sOOPR podcast. In these conversations, we're bringing you even more insights from successful fellows and advice from leaders from across the UK research landscape. I'm Nikhil Alawalia, and this is brought to you by the British Junior Cardiologists Association in partnership with the BHF CRC. If you like these videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave your comments below. It's a real privilege today to be joined by Professor Sir Nilesh Samani. Sir Nilesh is Professor of Cardiology at the University of Leicester and a consultant cardiologist at Glenfield Hospital. He's also the Medical Director of the British Heart Foundation and holds fellowships at many of our leading academic organisations, including the UK Academy of Medical Sciences and the Royal College of Physicians. His work has been recognised by the British and European Cardiology Societies for the extraordinary contribution he's made to our specialty. So, Sir Nilesh, once again, thank you so much on behalf of all the BJCA members and our wider audience for taking the time to join us this morning.
My pleasure.
So I'd just like to start by asking you about your personal journey into academia. Perhaps you could tell us about your journey up until your MD and how you got interested in cardiology.
Nikhil, it's great to join you. I was actually one of the first medical students to Leicester Medical School when it opened. So that was really exciting because there were only 48 of us in the first year, and therefore we were actually very well looked after. And then when I finished I did an integrated BSc. So many people who get into research often take an opportunity in their medical career to do a degree as well, as you know. And I did mine on the sort of slightly esoteric subject of teratogenesis. How aspirin can cause malformations in during pregnancy if you take it at high dose. So that was quite interesting. And my research bug really started at that point in time, that I wanted to combine clinical practice with research. After I did my house and SHO training, I spent a bit of time in London at some of the academic centres in London, the Hammersmith Hospital, where I saw how clinical medicine and science works together. At Guy's and at the Queen Square. I went back to Leicester, and really it's opportunities. You have to have mentors, and I had a very good mentor in Professor John Swales, who was Professor of Medicine in Leicester at the time, and he recognized that molecular biology was the sort of upcoming thing. So he said to me, if you want to think about research over the next 20 years, think about doing things in molecular biology. And that's where I got interested in genetics and DNA and RNA. And I spent 3 years on an MRC training fellowship, basically making DNA and RNA and doing laboratory work, which I enjoyed thoroughly. Working in the laboratory next to Alec Jeffreys, who, as you know, discovered DNA fingerprinting. So it was a really exciting time. But at that stage, the question. So I got my MD at that point with my research, but really, it's life, as I'm sure all of you recognize, is a combination of luck and being in the right place at the right time. So just as I was finishing my MD, David DeBono came to Leicester as a BHF Professor of Cardiology. And he said to me, look, if you are really interested in a combination of clinical and academic work, I can join my new department of cardiology in Leicester, and I'll make sure that you get clinically trained and that you can continue to do some striving research. So I was very fortunate to be able to find a very welcoming environment to do this work in, and therefore, so that's the sort of story up to my MD in terms of really a combination of good mentorship, from colleagues who could recognize where the field is moving, and to some extent luck.
And then, what was your approach to this luck? I mean, did you go and speak to these individuals about your enthusiasm and keenness to participate, or did they come to you?
No, I think it's a combination. If you're in the department where you see opportunity, you go and speak to colleagues and say, look, I want to have this joint career in research and clinical practice, and what you need is a supportive environment to be in. So and you have to then decide on what are the clinical research questions you're going to ask. What is your sort of strategy for research? A lot of people obviously do a bit of research to understand how it works, but if you have a long-term ambition for research, then you have to say, what is an important long-term question you want to answer? And my interest really was around genetics of common cardiovascular diseases. There are lots of people working on the rare forms of cardiovascular disease where there's clear genetic influence. But my interest was around the family history of coronary artery disease. Why does it run in some families? And can we understand that better? And of course, that's where my interest really started in trying to understand that. And initially, the tools were very blunt. You could look at individual candidate genes. So you could look at the renin gene, or you could look at the LDL receptor gene. But again, it's not luck, but it's what you ought to do is to be able to grasp technology as it comes along. And I think as new developments happen, particularly in the DNA world, where you could look at the whole genome, then the world opened up in terms of what you can do. So it was really quite exciting to be able to live through that era of rapid developments in genomics, with sequencing, now coming in, and what you had to do as a clinical scientist often is to make sure you get the right resources. So we had large collections of patients with premature coronary disease, so we could apply these new technologies quickly to them as they emerged.
Yeah, and I will come to the BHF in a second, but you mentioned the guidance from Professor Swales and De Bono about molecular cardiology and how it was going to take off. Looking forwards from your standpoint now, do you see any other great opportunities for trainees and where to go with their career? Do you have any thoughts?
I think there are so many different opportunities in cardiovascular medicine. We're very privileged to have that. I mean, as you say, because of my role at the BHF, I have that landscape view of things to some extent. The things that really excite me is the application of artificial intelligence to solving some of these issues. Both from, if you look at things in imaging, how can you use AI to do that, all the way to routinely collected healthcare data? How can you use AI to improve care? So I think that is a very exciting area of medicine, aligned to the fact that digital health will be coming along. So how can we do research that improves digital health? To the fact that even in genetics, there is obviously the potential of using CRISPR-Cas9 technology in really modifying DNA. So I think those will come in our generation. It will come in the next 20 to 30 years. Regenerative medicine remains a very powerful area for research in various aspects of medicine, particularly cardiovascular medicine. So there are several areas that I think are still very exciting, and developing the sorts of technologies that really would allow things to move at pace.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Now, going back to the BHF, what was your first interaction with the organization? And can you tell me about how that's grown and changed to where you are now?
Thank you for that question. So like any researcher, the BHF is one of the major funders of cardiovascular disease it is a major funder of cardiovascular disease in the UK and around the world. So my first interaction, of course, was to get a grant from the BHF. When you were applying, if you're a cardiovascular scientist or researcher, BHF is one of the places you would apply for grants. So I remember receiving my first grant maybe in the early 1990s, 1991, I think, when I got my first project grant. The next major milestone for me, and then we received a number of other grants, but the main milestone was that I had the privilege of being appointed as a personal BHF chair. One of the things that the BHF funds is personal awards for individuals at different levels, from PhD students to intermediate fellows to senior fellows to BHF professors. And the BHF currently has about 30 professors around the UK, and those are personal awards. There's an application, and there's a process to go through. But in 2003, I was appointed as a BHF professor of cardiology in Leicester, and that is it's a great privilege to have that position, because it gives you some core support. It obviously is a recognition of where you are in your career at the time. And I remained in that position as a BHF chair of cardiology in Leicester till I became the medical director in 2016. So I've had a long-standing relationship with the BHF, as have many cardiovascular researchers in the UK. Indeed, many non-cardiovascular researchers in the UK.
Yeah, many of the people we've had on this podcast have been starting their journey thanks to the BHF. And now, as medical director, what are your ambitions, or what sort of legacy do you want to leave?
When I arrived, things were working well. We had awards, from project grants, for people, for specific bits of work, to program grants. We had personal fellowships, as I mentioned, from PhD students all the way to senior professors. So there were many things that the BHF already did in terms of supporting the research ecosystem. I know from speaking to external people who looked, I think that people are often envious of what the BHF was achieving in the way they spend their money wisely. So I was building on a strong foundation already, but there's also things that I wanted to sort of advance, which were different, was more around networks and partnerships, which I felt were really, really important. So one of the things, I mean, amongst various initiatives we've taken forward, we set up the Clinical Research Collaborative, the BHF Clinical Research Collaborative, to really allow colleagues, clinical colleagues in particular, to coalesce in a particular specialty, say heart failure or cardiac surgery or arrhythmias, to coalesce around what are the critical questions they want to answer in their specialty, involving patients, the public in those decisions, and then come to the BHF or another funder. And I wanted to create the CRC really to allow people who have more limited time to do research to still be able to participate. And it's beginning to take off now, the CRC, in terms of being an established place for people to go to try and be part of a group of people who develop high quality clinical studies. So that's one initiative. The other one was our partnership with the NIHR. So as you know, many of the places where we fund our professors or our researchers are often centers where the NIHR also provides a foundation in terms of the biomedical research centers. And I used to be the director of the Leicester NIHR Cardiovascular Biomedical Research Unit. So there's clearly a synergy between the NIHR and the BHF in these areas. And what I want to do was to create a partnership between NIHR funded researchers and BHF funded researchers in these places. So we set up the NIHR BHF cardiovascular partnership. So again, that's been very successful. The third one I wanted to mention before I get into sort of international things was the value of routinely collected healthcare data for advancing our understanding of cardiovascular diseases. So after a lot of consultation with the relevant people, we set up the BHF Data Science Center under the leadership of Professor Kathy Sudlow. And the purpose of the center really is to say, how can we harness obviously appropriate governance, how can we harness routinely collected healthcare data? How can we link it with other data sets, so the NICO registries, for example, but other data sets, to allow the best information we can get from this data. And of course, AI still also comes into that to some extent. But by creating the Data Science Center, we hope to advance a whole bunch of different types of research, from things such as clinical trials using routine outcomes, collected outcomes, so make trials more effective, to provide the ability to collect patient-collected data. I mean, what the tsunami that's going to come our way is that you and I have an iPhone and we'll have our Apple Watch and other things. At the moment, we see patients in a very static fashion. We see them in a clinic, and then 3 months later, we'll see them in a clinic, and we'll say, how are you? I think in the future, particularly with AI and enable things, the source of information you and I collect on our phones and our devices will be used to inform how the patient has done over those 3 months, rather than these static individual views of people. So I hope that the Data Science Center will also have that with this remit. How do you harness the potential of what patients will be collecting themselves? The other areas is, of course, structured, unstructured data, in terms of scans and so on. How can we use those better? So the Data Science is a big remit, but the focus is routinely collected healthcare data. And some of you will have heard about the Big Challenge, which was one of our very large awards. So about 4 years, shortly after I started, the trustees of the BHF, who are ultimately the guardians of the BHF, said, look, a lot of what we fund provide incremental improvements in knowledge, and that's very good. But can we make a sort of transformational change in some area of cardiovascular medicine? And to do that, you need to invest a lot of money. So we put out a challenge to the world community, not only the UK community, to say, if you were to make an award of £30 million, come up with a problem that we need solving in cardiovascular medicine and suggest a transformational change. And we will hopefully be announcing shortly who the winner of that is. So that's been great. And finally, more recently, you might have heard that we set up the Global Cardiovascular Research Funders Forum, which is bringing together the national research funders in cardiovascular medicine, particularly charities, the American Heart Association, the Australian Heart Foundation, the Dutch Heart Foundation, DZHK, to say, can we we weren't really talking to each other that much. We knew each other, but we weren't really talking. So the GCRFF now brings us together. We wanted to make sure that we could share the costs of the trials because, if you're multiple funders, the trials will be better because it involves a broader range of people. There are more generalizable results. Across countries, if it's only UK-based, people will say, well, maybe there's some peculiarity to the system. And particularly for rarer diseases, it means that you have a much more, access to much larger population to select patients from. And speed and efficiency of delivering the trial, where you only have to recruit 500 people in the UK rather than 2,000, whereas others are being recruited elsewhere, is something that would help. So we think this is going to be a great initiative as well. So
Yeah.
as I said, nothing was broken at the BHF when I arrived, but it's been a privilege to do some things in a slightly different way and to have a different sort of ambition.
So thinking now about how research in the UK compares to these other countries that you've mentioned, what do you think are the advantages of doing academic work in the UK compared to other countries?
I think we have a fabulous research ecosystem. We are sort of a good-sized country. We've got 60 plus million people, so we can do some high quality work. We've got some of the world's leading institutions in terms of academic work. We have an NHS, a unified healthcare system where you can advance research quickly if you wish to, if you're a clinical researcher. And we have a very robust funding mechanism. I appreciate, that when you don't get a grant from the BHF or one of the other funders, you always say, it's not great. But if you look at the opportunity that people have in the UK to get research funding if they've got good ideas, there's a British Heart Foundation. We spend, our ambition is to spend more than £100 million a year funding new research. Okay, there's the Wellcome Trust, a budget of more than £1 billion. We have the government funding bodies, UKRI and the Medical Research Councils. So I think it's as per capita, if I can put it like that, there's as much opportunity for people to do research in the UK as there's anywhere else. And we have got a fantastic, as I said, ecosystem to do it in. So I think we should feel very proud and privileged to be able to do things here. Maybe sometimes we are not as entrepreneurial. In many places you hear, particularly the States, that people spin out companies quickly and advance things in a big way. We need to improve that to some extent. But in terms of an academic, of a research system, I think we've got a lot of positive things.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot of great organizations. But now on an individual level, you're an academic leader with an ethnic background, which I think makes you a role model for many of the cardiologists and researchers from Asian backgrounds or from other communities as well. And we're also recording this on International Women's Day. And I think it's very important to recognize how BHF and other organizations can do more, and what you may be thinking about doing to try and address some of the disproportional representation at the highest levels of academic leadership in our country. Now, having been through the whole process and seen everything up to the high position you're at now, what are your thoughts and views on that?
I think you raise a very important point, Nikhil, and not only the BHF but other funders really, this is right at the top of my agenda at the moment in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusiveness. I think it's brought out by recent events around the world, both in the pandemic and even before the pandemic, about things are being exposed much more. That both in terms of not only who we study, who do we include in our research. There's been a tendency to say, you mentioned women's, many of the clinical trials that have been done did not have enough women in them. You say, how do you do that? And certainly did not have the ethnic minorities. So we need to change certainly the BHF, and I know the Multinational Clinical Trials Initiative I mentioned earlier, that will be a question that we ask, what is if a trial is proposed that is not diverse in its inclusiveness or demonstrably diverse, it won't be supported by the GCRFF. So I think that signal is going out in terms of the type of our expectations, the type of the clinical research that's being done under our banner. So that I don't think is negotiable, and it's going to change. And I think it'll make it much more inclusive. Obviously, there are communities that are hard to reach. So this is not an easy challenge, as you know, around including people within research. And we need to find new mechanisms of making sure that they can be involved, because and I know that participating in research studies like this actually enhances people's care as well. But that's about research. It's more about the research ecosystem and the community we bring together. And you're right that we don't have, gender, ethnicity. We don't have the same representation that we just occurs in the population as a whole. So it's very skewed towards things. And the sorts of awards we give on our personal awards, but how the question is we can only in a sense respond to who applies to us. So what we need to change is a system whereby people feel encouraged to apply to us.
Yeah.
And I think it's about, you look at the number of people, if you look at medical schools at the moment, more than 50% of people who attend medical are women. If you look at the ethnic diversity of medical students, it is fairly broad. But yet, when you get into cardiology or cardiovascular science or other things, the numbers start to peter out, especially as you get to senior levels. And we need to understand the reasons why that is happening. I think things are changing. If I look at the very top level view, look at where we were 10 or 15 years ago, I think things are better. They're not perfect, and these things take time to really embed. But I wanted to sort of reassure people that really this is the focus not only of the BHF. We'll be publishing an EDI strategy shortly, both about our expectations of the type of people we support and fund and make sure that it's as diverse as possible, our expectations of the type of research that is carried out. And NIHR put out an EDI strategy recently. I know other organizations are working similarly. So this is being shown on. I hope that will reassure and bring confidence to the community. But ultimately, it's a mindset, isn't it? It's a mindset of people who are entering the profession. If they see role models, that's great. And if they want to emulate them, that's good. But we need to change that feeling that they can achieve what they want to achieve. It's for them to see the opportunities, for us to make sure that they have exposure to the opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for acknowledging that and discussing it transparently. Now, finally, I wonder if you have any words of wisdom to give to trainees at the start of their academic journey, or messages that you wish you'd had at the start of yours.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm always a bit wary about giving advice, because, I have two boys and I just want to be sure that advice is probably taken. It's difficult. I mean, I often reflect on this because, how did things, things have always not always gone right. We have to understand that. And we know this. I think finding a good mentor, somebody who you respect and can support you, is really important. I mean, I was very fortunate that I had a number of fantastic mentors. I mentioned John Swales at the beginning. I mentioned David DeBono. I think that is essential. There's somebody who has an interest in you is important. I think identifying an important question is important. Important. You have to be excited by what you're doing, and you can see, you should be able to see the end goal. So I don't like, I see some people get drifting into research just because they feel they need to do something, and the question is not that fantastic. You have to own the question that you want to answer. And you have to be excited. You have to be able to get up in the morning every day and say, yeah, this is an important thing. It may be long term, but you have to be excited. So I think good mentorship, you excited by the question and you can see the potential. So dig deep a little bit. Don't just take the superficial question. Just think about where the field might be advanced as a consequence. See whether you're doing basic science research or clinical research. I think the same principles apply. You have to see what the bigger picture is that you're contributing to. And then, of course, if you're passionate about it, then I think it will show through. I mean, there are people who do this. So I think the investment you need to make to succeed is non-trivial. I don't think these things happen, by just if you just by chance. I think you need to really make the effort if you want to succeed in this area. So I think your own personal investment, thinking about where you're interested in the question, and good mentorship.
Yeah.
And there may be and luck, as I said earlier, and a good dollop of luck is also important in all of these things. You find yourself in particular positions. I've been very fortunate. I've stayed in Leicester throughout most of my working career. I've never felt I needed to move. Leicester's been a great environment. Some people feel they need to move from place to place. I've just felt very privileged to be in a very welcoming environment. At the hospitals I work in, the university I work at. And of course, the role at the BHF now is a role of great privilege. I feel very fortunate to be able to do it.
Well, thank you for everything that you've done and the BHF has done for cardiology research in the UK. And once again, thank you so much for giving up your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's really great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Join us next time on the podcast for...
Writing is a skill that most of us lose during medical training. And again, it needs a bit of conscious effort to get back into it.
I'm joined by Dr. Andrew Lewis, who's a postdoctoral research fellow and clinical lecturer in Oxford. He talks to me about how to develop research ideas, how to write up impactful research, and what he learned about using social media to share your work.